Before I put any more primer on these doors, I wanted to get a couple of shots of how the repairs came out on the bottoms of the doors. And because I like to wet sand my finished putty work, I like to have primer underneath that. So I want to make sure all the bare metal and all the plastic, all the body filler has a good couple of coats of epoxy primer over top of it. That way when I'm wet sanding, any moisture that does get down through isn't going to affect the bare metal, and it's not going to affect the body filler. You know, I think I forgot to mention something about this engine in here. Because when this project started out, I had an old LA Block 360 I was putting in there that some guy had in a Duster or something. And I ran into a lot of problems with motor mounts, the oil pan, clearance for the oil filter. There was a lot of issues. So I ended up going with a 5.9 Magnum engine. And one thing I haven't decided on completely is whether or not I'm going to keep the injection, try and make that work. I'm looking into different systems, but it looks like a lot of money to keep the injection. So I did buy a Mopar Performance manifold, and I found an old 650, I think it's a 650 Edelbrock carburetor that Weber makes, and you know, we'll try it, see how it works. I'm not to that point yet, but I think the Magnum engine was definitely a good choice because of the motor mounts. I had to buy an oil pan for a Dakota because this engine came out of a Ram 2500, I think. I don't know what kind of shots we got of this radiator support that I created. I remember we did get some shots of it in earlier sequences, but this from here down is a Dakota radiator support. It actually came out of a Durango, same thing. But I fashioned these brackets to hold the nose, and I welded a piece of this 2-inch rectangular tubing on here with and made it so I could bolt the radiator to it with a catch nut behind there. So another thing I've got to do, which I almost forgot, I never finished off this thing to receive the radiator cap. I welded it in, put some fiberglass around the welds, and that's where I stopped. So I got to finish that. Okay, now something I want to do with the nose here is I want to eliminate these cutouts that used to be for the bumper brackets. So I'm going to get rid of those. So probably what I'll end up doing is cutting this piece out. Then what I want to do is a recessed mounting for a license plate. Because you have to have a front license plate in Massachusetts, so there won't be a bumper, so there'll be no other way to mount it unless I mount it out here, which I'm not going to do. I guess I better leave this alone before I start getting too low. I think this is just about where I want it. I've got to fix a couple of things with the putty, and then shoot some high build primer on it and see how straight it really is. Hopefully it's okay. When I was replacing the bottoms, when I was welding in those patches, this is the one I tried to duplicate this original configuration the way they did it in the factory. And I look at it now and I go, why did I go through all that? This thing's going on a friggin' Dakota frame. Who cares? But anyway, it was a good exercise, I guess. So I shot the high build primer on these doors, and I think they came out pretty straight. Because I used the dark gray primer, and while it's wet, you can get a pretty good idea of what you're looking at. Yeah, these things look pretty straight. I mean, in here was where I had the most trouble with this one, and It looks pretty good. So today is the day that I'm going to cut these pieces out of the nose, like I talked about earlier, and I'm going to separate them and make a place for my license plate. So I just got to carve out some of this stuff first. That'll be the first order of business. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, so one thing I'm going to have to do is make holes on each side, so when I get my saw up in there, I can make a turn and go the other direction. So they've got to be roughly the size of the blade, obviously. So let's do that. There. All right, this bit looks to be about the right size. Before I go make my final 2 cuts across here, these are the pieces that I'm going to slide down, and then the license plate will be recessed in what's left. You'll see. So with these 2 pieces slid down to these positions, the opening in the center is where I make the recessed box for the license plate. Okay, so now we've got our little panels clamped into place to be welded. So now I need to take some cardstock and trace out these angles so I can transfer them onto some 18 gauge sheet metal and cut them out and weld up my little license plate mounting thing. So I'm going to place this little piece of cardstock in here. I actually need something rigid behind it so I can get a nice true trace of this angle. And just run the pen around there, like so. And there's our shape. And it'll just be a nice little recessed box to hold the license plate. I still had some 18 gauge sheet metal kicking around the shop, but I traced out my cardboard onto the 18 gauge, and I just have to make some pretty simple 90-degree bends in it. So I'm just going to slowly pull this down. I've got it so it'll go past everything that would interfere. I'm going to get it down where I want it. Just going to give a little tap. Of course my vise isn't tight enough, but it should be all right. So these are the 2 center sections that were slid over, and this is the box I made for the license plate. Alright, so we got some epoxy primer on all this over top of the welds and on the bare metal of the box that I made. And now I just got to put some body filler over it. It doesn't look, it's not too bad, didn't come out too bad. But so it won't take much body filler to straighten this out, but that'll be the next step.